Welcome to the Coach Dave Love podcast with NBA shooting coach Dave Love and your host, Matt Robertson, exploring the cutting edge of evidence-based shooting development in basketball today, from shooting form to skill acquisition to shot metrics. This is the Coach Dave Love podcast.
Welcome to the Coach Dave Love podcast. I am your host, Matt Robertson, and with me, as always, NBA shooting coach Dave Love. Dave, what's going on?
New hotel room. I exploded the air conditioner in the last room and got moved to a new hotel room. So that's what's going on, Matthew. What's going on with you?
Listen, this is very on brand. No AC in Calgary means you're doubling down on AC in Chicago, so I appreciate that. Nothing's going on with me. Shot 86 today. Really excited for this pod. That's kind of the Coles notes.
Perfect. Thank you for the lead in, because I want to introduce Derek Panchuk, who is living in Canberra, Australia. You're living in Canberra, correct, Derek?
Yes,
but you're gonna notice Derek doesn't talk funny, and I told you I was gonna spring a little thing on you, Derek. Can you remind myself, a Calgarian, and tell Matthew, a Monktonian? What are people from Moncton called?
You got it.
Where are you from, Derek?
I'm actually from Calgary. Yes. Born and bred, lived in Calgary till I was about 28 years old when I finished a PhD. And my first overseas foray was moving to Australia, and that was 16 years ago. And still here today.
So, Derek, with when you were in Calgary, I'm guessing. Well, do we want to get right to this?
I was gonna say, David, just not to jump in, but that's Dr. Panchuk to you. I just want to get that going.
That's a great point.
I didn't know that. I'm coming in blind to this episode. I'm really excited. Sorry, get going here.
So, Derek, or Dr. Panchuk, can you tell us a little bit about your entry into coaching? Like, did you play sports? Were you an avid athlete in some sport? What was that transition?
I mean, obviously growing up in Canada, hockey was the thing that I played. Played it up until about junior. Also played like high school football and stuff like that. And after sort of my playing career was done, I ended up sort of making the transition that a lot of people do into coaching, and coached minor hockey for a number of years while I was in Calgary doing my PhD. Also coached high school football as well after for a little while. So dabbled in coaching, and then got to a point where the PhD studies got a bit overwhelming, so put it aside for a while. And then I ended up moving to Australia, where I had pretty much zero skills to bring to the coaching table with the funny sports that we have down here, like cricket, AFL, those types of things. But it's also probably where I made maybe a bit of a transition from, coaching athletes to really working with coaches. And I've been called a coach of the coaches at some point, but I guess supporting them on their journey to help athletes reach their potential now, and that's sort of what I've been doing for the last several years down here.
Do you mind me asking, what was your PhD in, and did you change during that transition period, or you just needed a break?
Really, it was always sort of, it was around neuromotor learning was the fancy name for it. But basically a big part of it was understanding how people learn and develop skills. My specific area of interest was around perception. And so how we can use the information that we take in from us around the performance environment to improve performance, and so really understand how vision particularly influences the way that people perform.
And so were you, you're doing this as you're a young coach yourself, were you what we would call like a traditional coach early on in your coaching career, or did you have some of these concepts already Like, were you working with skill acquisition ideas right from the get-go?
Probably not, to be honest. It was probably one of the biggest hypocrites out there. And I think part of it too is because, I like a lot of coaches out there these days. I learned from the people who I'd experienced sport through. And so that was kind of where I learned, and I didn't know any different. And so it was kind of, but as I sort of went down this journey and started learning more about how people learn and the importance of perception, you try and bring different details into it. And now, in the role that I do now, supporting coaches, try and push those a little bit more because, I know there's lots of expectations having gone through it myself, but then also spent a lot of time talking with coaches about those expectations, about what coaching should look like. Um, just trying to get people to reflect and challenge some of those ideas where it's appropriate, because I think a lot of the good stuff, a lot of people are doing a lot of really good stuff, but there's always ways to enhance and augment that as well.
So my question for you is, I'm relatively new to the sort of science of skill acquisition. Most of my learning, almost all of my learning, has been through this podcast from Dave. And what I've kind of lamented is that I don't know if there's a lot of research out there, but the research certainly hasn't pervaded my sphere, whether that's basketball or the coaches that I'm around. How much of that research is out there? And doing your PhD, were you doing a lot of new research, or are you sort of adding to what was out there? Like, what did that kind of look like to you?
Probably adding to it out there. I think there's plenty of good ideas around, like how do we design effective practices? How do people best learn? How do we get feedback? And so really basic fundamental questions. But I think the issue for me, and I started my career as an academic and was, real theoretical black and white. And I think that's part of the problem, is that there's a lot of black and white thinking and not a lot of appreciation of what coaches have to deal with in the real world. But I moved it from an academic position into a more practical position. I was working at the Australian Institute of Sport and start talking a lot more with coaches. And then you recognize that, there's all this stuff locked away in journals that coaches just don't have access to, and really basic fundamental concepts. And so it was really interesting for me, kind of, I guess, recognizing and identifying the gap, and then also having to come to terms with the fact that coaches have a lot of pressures on them around what they have to actually deliver in the real world. And so, these two things almost put up big barriers for coaches in order to do a lot of that stuff. So I think one of the things that's really exciting right now is a lot of these barriers are getting sort of broken down. We're on the podcast right now talking about these ideas and, spreading them around to people who might otherwise not have access to them. So the access to information, I think, is a big help in that front.
I love that you're willing to admit, Derek, that you maybe starting your coaching career weren't even the coach that you thought you should be. Like, I try and be very open and honest that I am certainly not an expert in skill acquisition ideas. I only became aware of them probably 7 or 8 years ago myself, and I hope that's empowering to other coaches that, just start somewhere. I guess my question to you is, was it the move to Australia that, like, I'm guessing you had a period of time where you were only able to be a theoretical coach, not a practical coach? Was that kind of the thing that tipped you towards, like, really diving into a niche?
And I think that's a big part of it, was the transition. I think, number one, the ideas around the practical application of concepts around skill acquisition and skill learning are more prevalent here in Australia. Like, they've been around, or I guess weaved through the ecosystem a lot longer than they have elsewhere. We've got, like, people like Damien Farrow, who's a great colleague to. He was one of the great people in that space. Bruce Abernathy. So there's some good people around there to help that along. And then, I think for me personally, starting to interact and talk with coaches was a huge game changer for me, because all of a sudden you sort of recognize that it's not black and white. There's a million shades of gray. There's different things that coaches have to deal with at different times. And at the end of the day, you've got people in front of you that are just trying to do the best job that they possibly can to help people achieve their potential. And I think when you sort of see this and you kind of become empathetic to it, for me, then it's like, okay, well, how can I go out and best support these people? To continue to enhance the things they're doing and get better at what they do. Because I think, good coaches want to get better. Not all coaches want to get better at different times, but I think good coaches continually want to strive and do better because they know that that's something that I guess is at the end of the day, it's all about the people in front of you, which is really exciting.
I would say that all coaches say they want to get better, but who among them actually will do the work to do the things to get better is another conversation that you don't have to answer a question there. That's not to throw anybody under the bus here.
Rabbit hole.
Can you tell me a little bit about why you chose Australia for kind of your area of practice?
It's an interesting one. Well, it was the first place that would hire me, to be honest with you. I was kind of like, I was coming to the end of my PhD. I'm like, what the heck am I going to do? It was, I guess I sort of had this, I said it has to be an academic type role. So it was either going to be, a position or a postdoc, throwing out applications to anything that even looked remotely interesting. Was fortunate enough to get, an interview at a university in Melbourne, Victoria University. Had the interview. They're like, we'll get in touch within a couple of weeks. Got a phone call a couple hours later, and they said, are you interested? And I was like, yeah. I've always wanted to come to Australia. I'm like a huge animal person, and they've got the weirdest animals here. And so it was one of those places that always sort of drew me in. And here I am. I've had kangaroos jumping down my street at different times. So yeah, it's kind of, it was a dream come true. But then, there's been great opportunities to come up along the way in my journey here. And I'm fortunate to be here.
So, Derek, I'd love to have you on another time to talk about skill acquisition, but for this particular episode, we want to talk about Quiet Eye. You and I connected at Las Vegas Summer League for the NBA, and as Matt would say, hoisted a couple of waters together. And I don't think most coaches have any idea what Quiet Eye is. So can you explain that to them?
Yeah, I mean, Quiet Eye, if I was to sort of sum it up, I'd say it's this period of optimal focus that helps athletes coordinate what they're doing so that in the moment of execution, they can perform to their maximum. And so, basically it's sort of a variable that I guess stresses the importance of vision in the whole perception action cycle along the way. And it's sort of like this penultimate moment of focus during a performance that leads, that when you've got it, good things happen.
Can you simplify it even further for me so my role here in the pod, I'm the voice of the people. I'm your below average Joe, and will openly say I can make a guy better if you put him in front of me. The full concept X's and O's. I'm below average Joe. Can you simplify that even further for me?
Great athletes see the game different. They look at the right place at the right time. And really what Quiet Eye is one of the measures that sort of identifies this period of optimal focus for an athlete that lets them do the great things that they need to do. That's simple.
Interesting. That's pretty simple. I like it. Let's dive in.
Okay.
Where do we start with this, Derek? Because my understanding of Quiet Eye, like I think I've told you, Dr. Vickers. Now, did Dr. Vickers start the idea? Can you talk a little bit about Dr. Vickers for a second?
Yeah. So she was my supervisor at the University of Calgary. She has done a lot of really interesting things looking at vision and performance. And one of the early studies that she did was in 1996, put an eye tracker on some basketball athletes, had them shooting free throws, and then did an analysis. And what she found was that the thing that separated the good shooters from the not, I mean, decent shooters was this thing called, was this last fixation, which is a fixation is basically, when our eyes are still on the environment and we're able to take information in. So she found that this last fixation was something that separated the good from the great. And the great shooters, the ones who did really well in that study, they got their eyes to the rim sooner and they maintained a fixation there longer. And what she found is when they did that, they generally performed better than the lesser skilled athletes in that group. And so she coined this term at that time in 1996, the quiet eye. And since then, it's been a thing that's been studied in basketball pretty extensively across a different number of shots, but then outside of that in a whole array of different activities. So I did my PhD in ice hockey goaltenders, and so looking at how goalies respond to the puck, everything from law enforcement to catching the ball, those types of things is pretty well studied, and one of those things that's acknowledged to be a pretty robust finding in the scientific world, I guess.
Like, this makes me positively giddy. 1996. So that's the first note, is that this research is from 1996. So it's 27 years old.
Bunches of time.
Yeah, I was going to say mathing. So that's a wild thing. But just thinking about the sort of implications of this on my players and driving focus for them, like, this is sorry, Dave, go ahead. I need to process a little bit.
Yeah, what I just want to share is, so I was in Calgary. I've lived there my whole life. So I was at the University of Calgary as a coach in the early 2000s. And I can remember walking past the gym and you'd see like somebody with these weird sunglasses on and a fishing rod in their hand and a pretend pond set up on the other side of the basketball court, and they'd be casting towards the target, and you come in the next day and there's a putting green set up, and they're doing all this research around this idea in all these different sports back in in 2000. That would have been around 2003, 2004, and then I was a sample that was probably thrown out because I put on the sunglasses and was encouraged to shoot whatever number of shots that we needed to shoot. And my shooting motion, my hand kept hitting the sunglasses. I couldn't not hit the camera. And so Derek was very excited to show me the 2024 version of these glasses that now measure. Derek, can you talk a little bit about the technology now and maybe the evolution of it?
Yeah. So, eye tracking technology has probably been around for like 50 odd years. In sport, it's one of these things that's been really difficult to do because, as you've sort of experienced, Dave, it was these big sort of clunky systems that had lots of different cameras and had to sort of feed into VCRs and those types of things. So, but it was the best we had at the time.
Professor, what's a VCR?
You know what a VCR is, Dave.
for
Sorry, go on.
There, it's a video cassette recorder. So we had these big.
What's a cassette?
Oh gosh, yeah, dating myself. Yeah, and so there was these systems, and so they weren't really purposed for sports, but someone like Joan, who was a bit of a pioneer in the area, she'd like push things and figured out that we could actually use these things in sporting situations. They weren't perfect, but they did the job at the end of the day. But the technology has evolved a fair bit recently. So instead of sort of these, having to put on a helmet, and these different visors that reflect light in different ways and multiple cameras, essentially what they've got, what I showed you at Summer League, Dave, was it's basically a pair of glasses, and embedded within the pair of glasses are little cameras and little infrared lights that light up the eye. The cameras sort of pick up the eye. The machine does its thing, and essentially what you're left with is a camera that records a person's point of view. So there's a camera in the middle of the glasses that points straight ahead, and it takes the information from the sensors around the eyes and it puts a little cursor on there. So we get a little cursor that moves around when somebody moves their eyes. So, and it basically, so it's a pair of glasses and a little recording pack that's got a battery in it. And so we've gone from these big systems that require all these different bits of hardware to something that's really small, transmits over Bluetooth, those types of things. And that means we can do a lot more now in terms of getting people sort of performing naturally.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to suggest that we should probably take a quick break here and then come back, and we're going to put you on the spot here, Dr. Panchuk, at the end of the break. I feel like I have to be very official and at least slip in a few doctors.
Appreciate that.
Even though you're a very approachable guy. When we come back from the break, we're going to have to do an after timeout and sort of summarize the important point that we want to make sure that people understand from this little segment. So just be prepared for that when we come back from the break. Hey there, basketball fans. I'm NBA shooting coach Dave Love, and I've got exciting news just for you. Introducing my exclusive, free basketball shooting newsletter. It's packed with insights and techniques straight from the hardwood. Have you ever wondered how NBA players improve their shots? Or how you could get to the next level, whether you're a college player, a coach, or a budding youth player? My newsletter brings all this and more directly to your inbox. Each edition is a deep dive into the world of basketball shooting. I'll share some of the tips and ideas that I use with my NBA clients, tailored for every level of the game. But wait, there's more. Subscribers receive exclusive monthly discounts on my online products. From training videos to personalized coaching sessions, you'll get it all for a fraction of the price. And the best part of all, it's absolutely free to join. So what are you waiting for? Elevate your game and join a community of passionate players and coaches from around the globe. Signing up is easy. Just visit CoachDaveLove.com.
And welcome back. Coach Dave, thank you for laying out the ATO for us. This is an after timeout where we put 24 up on the thought clock up here in my office. And Dr. Panchuk is going to be the first ever guest-led ATO. So Dr. Panchuk, if you could just take 24 seconds and give us a concise look at what we just talked about.
All right. We've learned a lot about the way that people learn over the last few years. We know that vision is an important part of performance. And essentially what we've discovered is that there's optimal ways of controlling vision that help people perform better. And we can do that with eye tracking technology.
Oh, Coach Dave. Yeah, applause.
Yeah, really well.
Sign up to a 10-day. He drove the lane, kicked the wing, got the swing to the corner, knocked down a three. That's absolutely fabulous. I have 100 questions, and some of them are really simple. And when it comes to eye tracking, does somebody like Tracy McGrady or Steve Nash, who have kind of some, I don't know, optical inconsistency or not symmetrical eyes, is that an issue for the eye trackers? That's a super, maybe dumb question. I'm just super curious.
I think these days what the eye tracking technology does, it's pretty good at dealing with people and a wide range of people. So for most, quote unquote normal people with normal eye alignment and stuff, it works fine. For some of those outside cases, edge cases, it can be a bit of an issue, but I haven't run into too many problems where we've got somebody who can't wear the eye tracker and we can't get information from them. Again, this is sort of something that's evolved over time. Like, it used to be harder to get good data from people, but now that's less of a problem with the advances in technology these days.
Very cool.
Derek, you talked a little bit about the hardware, and then you referred to kind of what people see on, I'll call it the software. Like when you look at the monitor displaying what's coming out of the cameras, what do you see? Can you explain that again?
Yeah, so basically what we're left with is a first person point of view. So the camera is situated, it's in the middle of the glasses and it records basically what the person is seeing. So it's almost like you're jumping into the athlete's shoes. But what's really cool and where sort of the eye tracking bit comes in is there's a little dot on the screen that moves wherever the athlete moves their eyes, right? So they can be doing whatever they're doing, but we also see this little thing pop up that shows us exactly where they're looking while they're performing as well, which is, I think, the really cool bit.
I can confirm it's really cool. Like I had the glasses on and Derek had the monitor, and I me being the nerd that I am, I said like, okay, I'm looking at something very specific. Tell me what I'm looking at. And like 2 out of 3 times he was able to tell me what I was looking at. And the time that we didn't is like, are you looking at the brochure? And I'm like, no, I'm looking at the thing that is probably a quarter of an inch above the brochure, but further in the distance. So even the third time was pretty darn close to what I was looking at. How do you then how do you then use this information?
Yeah. Well, there's a few different things you get out of it. So for a lot of athletes, they've never seen that perspective on their performance before. So just putting the video of, this is where you're looking while you're performing can be really powerful for athletes and coaches to see, because it's just like I said, it's a whole new perspective on performance. And so that's one side of things. It's sort of, I guess, the qualitative bit where we can pick up some really interesting information, but we know that, sports move pretty quickly, and putting our eyes in the right place at the right time is really important. So the next step beneath that is, or digging into the data a little bit more, is then actually sort of quantifying when people are looking at different things at different times, right? And so that's where we essentially go through and code this video sequence to sort of say, okay, well, this is where somebody was looking at this time for how long. And then we can kind of get this whole record of what a performance looked like over time. And we can actually sort of start to identify quantitatively how effectively somebody is controlling their attention, or how effectively they're looking while they're performing as well.
And so what do you find uh like what do you find that good shooters in fact do more? Like you've talked about it, but can you get specific at like where do they look for how long? How do they screw it up?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's an interesting question. So, like, if we're talking broad brushes and sort of, big groups of people, they generally, or they typically try and get their eyes um, to the front or back of the rim as quickly as possible, generally on the back of the rim, and so there's this period of time between sort of catching the ball and getting to the hoop. And then there's also this period of focus on the hoop. And so what the research shows is that in things like the free throw, something around 1.5 seconds is kind of the optimal for if we're grouping everybody together. In things like the jump shot, so 3-pointers, those types of things, 300 to 400 milliseconds can be the difference between being successful and unsuccessful, and that changes depending on what's happening in front of somebody as well. Like, so if they've got somebody closing in, hand up, those types of things distracting them, then it's harder to sort of maintain that focus. And so what we see is when people are doing contested shootings, those numbers come down a little bit. But again, the general trend is that get the eyes to the hoop early and maintain the fixation there as long as or this focus as long as you can while you're performing.
I'm gonna take what I think somebody's assumption might be, and then I want you to tell me why might be wrong, if it is in fact wrong. You said a second or a second and a half is an optimal amount of time. Obviously, more is better. This is my sarcasm voice. More is better. So if I have the opportunity at the free throw line to stand staring at the hoop for 6 seconds, that would be better. True or false?
I'm going to say false. And I think it comes down to this sort of period of optimization, right? So we don't want people sitting on the line overthinking what they're doing, and that's sort of what happens if we sit there too long, right? So it's basically this period of time where, and this is where I guess the 1 to 1.5 seconds, it varies depending on the person, so it's individual. And so when we say optimizing, it's sort of figuring out what works for them. But I would say for most people, sitting on that line, there's this period of time where I'm going to feel uncomfortable, and then it gets to the point where all of a sudden more little things start creeping in and I start overthinking things. So it's almost like this U-shaped curve where there's this, okay, it's not great down here. There's this period of time where it's good, and if I overthink it, it's going to be bad again. So more isn't always better at the end of the day.
Very translatable. In my golf game today, I stepped off the tee shot because I was something was uncomfortable about my grip, and I was standing there for too long and had to step off. Still ended up shanking it in the water on the par 3. However, I did the responsible thing and stepped off the ball because it felt too long and I was starting to be in my head. It's totally relatable. So this U-shaped curve, is that a standard piece of data, or is this something you guys have kind of a theory that you guys have developed using Quiet Eye?
It's probably I wouldn't say it's something that's standard out there. Like, I think it's probably something that is more of a theoretical construct, and it's based on a bunch of different studies around what we know about performance and pressure and those types of things. So that being said, one of the things that I'm working on, I've got this little side project with a company called Ellipsis, where we're sort of developing automated eye tracking technology. Mind the plug there. But essentially that's what the aim is to try and do, is to try and figure out, okay, well, what's optimal for you, Dave? What's optimal for you, Matt? And then once we sort of get a picture of that, then it's a matter of thinking, okay, well, how can we use that information to then help you perform to your best, right? And so everybody's curves are probably going to look a little bit different along the way, but certainly believe that there's this point of diminishing returns, and there's this point where we're not getting enough along the way, and good sits somewhere in the middle.
I'm still reeling, Dave. This is very cool. Guys, let's go to a break. Derek, we're going to do another ATO on the tail end, so just prepare yourself for that. And we'll see you in a sec.
Hey basketball fans, Coach Dave Love here with an exclusive offer just for you, my personalized video shot analysis. Imagine having an NBA shooting coach analyze your shooting form, just like I do for the pros. That's exactly what you'll get with my video shot analysis. Here's how it works. You send me a video of your shot and I'll break it down frame by frame. I'll pinpoint your strengths and identify the areas of improvement and give you tailored advice to take your shot to the next level. You'll receive a comprehensive analysis designed just for you. Whether you're a beginner or an aspiring pro, my feedback will help you shoot with confidence and precision. It isn't just feedback, it's a game changer. With my video shot analysis, you're not just practicing, you're evolving, and every single shot counts. Ready to transform your game? Visit CoachDaveLove.com/store to learn more and get started. That's CoachDaveLove.com/store and look for video shot analysis.
Welcome back. Derek, another challenge. Let's see. You got a 10-day contract. Let's turn it into another one. 24 up on the thought clock. Give us a look at what we just talked about in the last segment.
Good players see the game differently. What we know from a lot of research in eye tracking is that there's this quiet eye period, and it means that players get their eyes to the hoop earlier and they maintain them for the optimal period of time. Optimal changes depending on who you are. You can do too little and you can do too much.
Man, he is good at this. So we started doing this, Derek, because I sometimes struggle with being succinct and concise. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be me forced to come up with like a succinct answer, summarize what I did. And you're really good at this.
Like, so, not flirting with the thought clock at all. Like, no violations in sight, just crisp. just execution at the highest order. You're hired.
It's almost like he said this many, many times over the last several years. So if I can, I want to share one experience that I had with Quiet Eye early on in my learning, about probably 2003, 4, 5, somewhere in that range. And then I want to talk about a player that I worked with like yesterday and today, and how it relates to what's going on. So where I'll start with Robbie Sahota. He was a part of one of the studies in 2003, 4, 5, somewhere in that range. And Robbie is a smart individual, in certain ways. This is my polite way of saying that, not in all ways. And we'd like, we would tease him. Book smart, but maybe would say some very silly things once in a while. Robbie had very unorthodox shooting form, but Robbie was also a very good shooter. And so we put the glasses on and just kind of watched, and I knew nothing but broad strokes about Quiet Eye, but I looked at the monitor, and after seeing about 4 other players dance and their little cursor kind of around the rim, Robbie then shot, and his cursor was like a laser beam. His eyes did not move. And that was sort of my introduction into, oh, okay, now I have like a little tangible understanding of how this works. Anything that you kind of want to clarify or talk about there, Derek?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great illustration, and one of the slogans or words that I've used to sort of describe what you've just mentioned there is this idea of aim small, miss small, right? And so in the moment of execution, being able to hone in on what matters is what's really important, right? And so it's almost like there's this funnel effect. And so I can be picking up information. The good players know where to pick up the right information. But as we get closer and closer to this moment of execution, that's where this intense period of focus becomes really important. And so I love that mantra, aim small, miss small, because for me, that really personifies what you're supposed to be doing.
I love that.
No, I'm thinking about kind of all the things with this technology, data, experience, and there are things that happen in a basketball game that players of the highest level, how they process the game, like you talked about, great players process things differently. I'm thinking about, seeing the help side defender shift over 2 feet too far. And I would probably never see that, but LeBron or whatever great point guard sees that every time, the sort of implications of that and what they're looking for and how they're processing that. Again, we're 25 minutes into this. I'm still reeling a little bit. Like this is really freaking cool.
So, Derek, I had a player that I've been working with the last couple of days who went undrafted and is now kind of figuring out his NBA career and probably a G League assignment. He has very unorthodox shooting form that we're working to create, but re-coordinate. And while working on that, I start to notice that his eyes are all over the place. So while doing stationary shooting like free throws, he will spend his routine looking down at the floor and start the shooting motion. And as the ball kind of gets to around his chin, then he turns his gaze to the rim. And so the first thing I said is like, hey, based on what I know about this idea, I want you to try and get your eyes on the target early. And specifically on free throws, I want you to have a beat before you actually start the shooting motion, where you just like, it's almost like you're saying to your body, that's where I want the ball to go. Like, just, I don't need a long period of time, just a beat. Any advice that you can give based on that little piece of information?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And it's one of the things that I've seen in lots of shooters as well. So, you get like an 88% free throw shooter. It's almost like their eyes are just as confident as their body. They get up there, they look where they need to look, and it works. And so that whole cycle comes together. And then I've had a guy who shot 55% in his career, and he was not good. And you could see it in his eyes. Like there was just no confidence in what he was doing. So he would sort of get up there, and his eyes, he'd look at the hoop because obviously that's the thing. But there would also be this sort of indecision almost that would come around and sort of be looking for different clues from what's going on. And I think a big part of this is just sort of opening up that whole idea that, like vision is a really important part of what you do here too. Let's be confident with that as well. And then, I think with that confidence comes, changes to what the body starts to do, right? That whole cycle of, what I see influences what I do influences what I see. And so we start to tinker on this side of things sometimes rather than just that side.
What drives me nuts is opinion-based coaching. And especially in this day and age where we have so much information that is quantitative to base our coaching upon, and we still just go back to opinions. What does your research say about the old argument of should you look up at the ball in the air? Like you shoot it, you're looking at the target as you shoot it, but then you gaze up the target. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I do. And I think there's, once the ball's gone, it doesn't matter. But there's this period of time where it does matter. And so my view is that if you start to look, or if you start to want to track the ball too soon, that can interfere with things that are sort of being put together, organized, and coordinated earlier in the shooting motion, because our brains are really wired for vision, and a lot of the areas that control our hands overlap with vision. So the coordination structures of our attention and our body are really closely linked. And if I'm telling my eyes to go start tracking that ball as soon as I release it, then that command almost, I don't necessarily love using that word, but that command came somewhere downstream. And so it can cause interference potentially in the precision of what I need to do if I do that too soon. Once it's gone and it's, a few hundred milliseconds out of the hands, doesn't matter. I can't do anything then. But before then, I think that there's potential for interference to start to creep in based on the stuff that I've read and seen.
I love that, and people will say, "Well, nobody's going to look up at the ball as they're shooting it," and I'm going to tell you, yes, they do. There was one off season where I had I forget who I did this for, but there were like 7 players that I had to kind of do a report on that were weak shooters, and so breaking down video, all opinion based, but 3 of those 7 were looking up at the ball before it was out of their hand. Exactly what you described, that they probably think that they're shooting and then looking up at the rim, and in fact the ball is still in their hands and their eyes have moved from their target to the basketball. 3 out of 7.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. And, coming back to some of the other work that I've done, in golf, I've seen some, and actually probably the bigger point here is that, a lot of athletes don't realize they're doing that stuff. They're because they can't see it. And so our perception, our brains can trick us a lot of times. And so coming back, I had a golfer that I worked with. She was a high-level amateur golfer hoping to turn pro, and we were looking at her putting. And so we sit down and record a bunch of putts wearing the eye tracker, and then get her to sort of say, okay, well, what do you do when you're putting the ball? She's like, well, I'll look to the hole, come back to my ball, do a second look, so I'm sort of confirming what I'm thinking there, and then as I'm drawing the putter head back and coming forward, I'm laser focused on that ball the entire time. We looked at her videos from the eye tracker, and the first part of it spot on, exactly what she thought she was doing, and then she would draw the putter head back. And as she was coming forward, her eyes would jump from the back of the ball to the putter head, and they would start tracking the putter right through contact. And she had no idea she was doing that until she got the eye tracker on. And for that, it's a pretty quick fix, right? Like, so, okay, this is what you thought you were doing. This is what you're actually doing. Can you talk me through what you're seeing here? And for her, quick light bulb moment. It's like, okay, I'm going to go out and try something a little bit different. So just go a little trial and error, and boom.
I bet my experience totally mirrors hers. I bet I would describe that I did the same thing as she described that she's doing, and I bet I actually do the same thing that she actually does, now that I think about it. That's crazy.
It is a really interesting thing, because I would always say I keep my eye. So again, golf example, continuing on, I keep my eye on the ball. In actuality, unless I'm so focused on just my swing thought is keeping my eye on the ball, I'm not dialed in on a dimple. I'm moving from front to back to top. Like there's not a ton of focus there. And in the last couple of weeks, I've been struggling, and that's kind of been my swing. Anyway, not important. Tell me about my golf struggles here, Derek. I need help. But it's really curious, because I would say that I generally keep my eye on the ball, but unless that's my very specific thought, that's the translatable thing for me here, is that you're working with players that it's their one specific thought, whether it's putting or basketball or what have you.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it too, right? Is getting players to understand that there's this link between what I see and what I do, and then trying to be deliberate around it. And a big part of that is increasing the awareness of what they're seeing, and making sure that, what I think I'm doing aligns with what I'm doing. And if there's a misalignment, how do we close that gap?
Derek, do you find that there is, and you may not have looked at this, or it might be hard to measure, because athletes will politely lie. Like they'll tell you that your suspicion is confirmed without actually really knowing that. Like they do that all the time. It drives me nuts. Like, just tell me the truth. I'm curious if you found a correlation between like a negative thought, like if a player's standing over a putt or at the free throw line and has that human negative worry as they're bringing it back, and do eyes tend to go a certain place? Do they tend to, like, is there anything that happens like that?
Probably at that level, I haven't sort of dug into it. Like the idea of, if like we've got a negative thought in there, what exactly happens? Because it's hard to sort of identify what happens when that negative thought creeps in. But done some interesting stuff looking at, if we start to put players under pressure, and say, okay, well, there's some consequences behind what you're doing right now, or, get a whole team in front of players, or some critical coaches in front of them. We put them under pressure. We see oftentimes changes in what they're looking at, right? So the optimal bit doesn't become optimal anymore. That window becomes a lot smaller along the way. So I think there's definitely some truth in what you're sort of talking about there, around this idea of the correlation between this negative thoughts around what we're doing and the outcomes. But outside of, I guess, this more general look at pressure, I haven't looked at it too closely, but it'd be fun to sort of explore a little bit more, I think.
Let's go take one more real quick break, and we'll come back with Hammer Action. One more ATO, Derek, and then we're going to go to Hammer Action.
Hey there, basketball fans. Coach Dave Love here with an exciting opportunity to revolutionize your shooting game. Introducing my exclusive shot development systems, Pure Release, Consistency and Balance, and Fluidity and Arc. Each system is designed to target key aspects of your shooting technique, transforming you into a more effective player on the court. Pure Release focuses on perfecting your shot release. Consistency and Balance enhances your stability and accuracy, and Fluidity and Arc works on your ball path and trajectory of your shot. Find out the drills and progressions that I use with my NBA players to improve these important habits. Can't decide which one to choose? No worries, grab the bundle and get all 3 systems at a fantastic value. It's a complete package to elevate every part of your shooting game. And there's a special deal for all my podcast listeners. Use the promo code podcast20 at checkout to save 20% on any of the shot development systems. Don't miss this chance to train like the pros. Visit CoachDaveLove.com/store and take your first step towards shooting success. That's CoachDaveLove.com/store.
And welcome back. All right, Derek, let's go 3 for 3. 24 up on the thought clock. Give me a recap of what we talked about in the last segment. No pressure.
This one is a tough one. We covered a lot of ground. I think for me here, the big one is probably that, this awareness around what we're seeing is really important, because our brains can trick us into thinking we're doing different things. But at the end of the day, if we can bring sort of the alignment between what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing together, we can make good things happen.
Awesome. Matt, do you want to explain hammer action, and then I'm going to try and ask a question to guide Derek into it?
Love that. So our hammer action segment, Derek, is we were looking for a basketball action that we could kind of has a catchy title. And hammer is kind of perfect because it literally is what we're trying to do. So hammer action is generally, a weak side screen on a player in a zone generally. And this is our chance to hammer home an actionable item from the podcast. So that is hammer action.
So my question then, Derek, is 99.9% of the coaches listening to this don't have access to the technology. What can they do with the concept? Like what would you recommend people actionably take away from this and start to incorporate in their practice without the technology?
Yeah, without the tech, I think you need to sort of, if you don't have the technology in front of you, it's really about exploring lots of different ways of controlling vision. And I think a big part of that is trying to unpack what's optimal for your athlete. So essentially, put them in situations where you're really limiting the time that they have to perform, and then really extending it. And then sort of getting them to sort of play around with different ways of controlling their eyes across that whole spectrum. And then sort of starting to ask questions around what they're doing to kind of narrow down what's optimal for them. So like, what's feeling good for you from, a thought standpoint while you're standing on the line. And so for me, in the absence of the technology, it really is, creating situations and cues as a coach where you help the athlete explore visual perception in shooting as part of the activity, as opposed to it being sort of a secondary thing.
And then we've got some NBA people that listen to the podcast. And so what would you recommend? Like, what would be your 30-second sales pitch on why they should be involving Ellipse 360? Is that correct?
We're Ellipsis, and the website is ellipsistech.com. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're right.
So what's your sales pitch to them?
The sales pitch, we all know vision's important, but it gets lip service because we can't see what a player can see. And we're aiming to change that. So using eye tracking technology, we can help you step into the player's shoes and see the game how they see it. And so essentially, assessing and understanding what players are doing is sort of the first point of call, and we can help you do that.
This has been like really helpful for me for just like cementing a couple of ideas where I thought I had a pretty informed opinion, and your answers really mirrored what I had been sharing specifically about like not being too long with the gaze, but like being around a second and a half. This has been really helpful in such a, and I take this as a compliment, a small but very important part of shoot. Like we think of shooting as being like the arms and the legs, and then we forget about the eyes.
Perfect.
So
there are stories that you hear every off season where so and so got contacts for the first time, and all of a sudden is starting to shoot the ball well. But generally, don't even think about that. Baseball players, when they pick up different spins on pitches, if you're not seeing the ball well, you're not hitting the ball well. It's a very simple thing. But basketball, generally, I don't consider vision other than, can you see the hoop or not? It's not what you're looking at. Really quickly, Derek, I know we talked front rim, back rim. Is there an optimal point that players should be looking at, aiming small, looking at the rim? Is there an optimal point?
I would say back rim is probably the better spot, because I think putting your eyes at the front, there's not really any space for you to move forward from that. But if we're at the back, you've still got that space in front of you, and you've got the backboard and the rim behind you as sort of the targets. So, and most of the players that I've worked with and seen, I would say 95 or more % of them use the back of the rim anyways. So,
which is fascinating because to support your point, I bet 50% would say back and 50% would say front. Yeah. And they're just not aware of what they actually do. That's fascinating. Derek, thank you very much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Where can people find you? Like, give yourself a little plug, direct people towards wherever you want to direct people right now.
Yeah, I think Ellipsis is sort of this company I've co-founded that we're starting up in the basketball space. Just www.ellipsis, and it's ELIPSYS tech.com. So it's Elite Performance Systems. Check out the website, have a look there. You can find me on social media, big on LinkedIn, Twitter. This is Derek Panchuk. Hit me up there if you got any questions. Yeah, I'm always keen to connect with curious coaches and talk shop.
Coaches that actually want to get better. Wow. Coach Dave, as always, where can the people find you?
Sign up for my newsletter on CoachDaveLove.com and follow me on Twitter, X, and Instagram at Coach Dave Love. What about you, Matty?
You can find me on X at Coach Matty Rob, and on LinkedIn as well, Matt Robertson. Dr. Panchuk, I just want to reiterate what a delight this has been. I apologize that you hit me with a knockout punch for about 25 minutes there as I was going through all the implications of this technology. But a fascinating look, and I hope we can have you on the pod again, because I think there are a lot of ideas we left unexplored in the skill acquisition space. Listeners, thank you for sticking with us to the end. As always, please rate, review, subscribe, tell a friend. It all really helps. And we appreciate your time. See us next week.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Coach Dave Love Podcast. To stay up to date with our future episodes, please remember to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to sign up for Coach Love's free shooting newsletter on CoachDaveLove.com, and be sure to follow him on social media. You can find him at Coach Dave Love.